All right, let's dive right into this explainer. When most of us think of Japan, our minds usually jump straight to those dazzling neon lit streets, the lightning fast bullet trains, and just this image of an absolute economic powerhouse. But today, we're going to look past that polished exterior to uncover a fascinating, data driven reality about hidden poverty, completely neutrally based on the research of Dr. K. Ali Akamic. We're going to start off by challenging a deeply ingrained perception, both globally and domestically within Japan itself. For decades, the narrative has painted the country as this flawless, hyper-wealthy utopia where everyone thrives and economic hardship is, well, practically non-existent. But when we actually look closely at the data, we have to ask ourselves, is there really no poverty in Japan? Back in the 1970s, the conservative LDP government championed this idea of a 100 million middle class, and it was an incredibly successful narrative. A 1975 government survey showed that a staggering 90% of citizens self-identified as middle class, genuinely believing economic growth was shared equally by absolutely everyone. But contrast that with the modern reality today. Over 15% of the Japanese population currently lives in relative poverty. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding what we actually mean by poverty in this context. We aren't talking about absolute starvation or complete destitution. We are talking about relative poverty. By definition, this means living on less than 50% of the national median household income. To put some real numbers to that, in 2021, the threshold was about 1.27 million yen, which is roughly 11,500 US dollars a year. So it really represents severe economic marginalization within a highly developed and, let's face it, very expensive society. The history of how this unfolded is actually pretty fascinating. For a long time, the government actively avoided even collecting poverty data. It was almost this ideological blind spot. But then the economic stagnation of the 1990s hit. Fast forward to 2003, and a municipal count revealed over 25,000 people living on the streets. Then the 2008 global financial crash happened, causing highly visible tent villages to literally spring up in Tokyo packs. The issue just couldn't be ignored anymore. Finally, in 2009, when the center-left Democratic Party took over, the government officially released poverty data for the very first time. Now, it's really interesting when you anchor this to the OECD data and compare Japan to other developed nations using the exact same metrics. The reality is kind of shocking. Japan actually has the second highest relative poverty rate among these nations. It sits right behind the United States and notably ranks even higher in relative poverty than countries like Turkey and Israel. It completely shatters that myth of perfect economic equality. Section 2. Who are Japan's poor? Let's transition from the macro-level statistics and put a human face on the three specific demographic groups most affected by this hidden crisis. 44%. That is a massive number, and it represents the relative poverty rate for single-mother households in Japan as of 2021. Now, sure, it's worth noting this is actually down from a peak of 63% in 1997, but it obviously remains exceptionally high. In a traditionally conservative society, single-parent families face massive social exclusion and incredible financial hurdles just to survive day to day. The second heavily impacted group, the elderly. As Japan's famous population ages, post-retirement incomes are proving to be vastly insufficient for a whole lot of people. This places Japan third in elderly poverty within the OECD, sitting just behind Korea and the USA. And this stark financial reality forces many seniors right back into the workforce well past retirement age, where they are often absorbed by the economy as cheap labor. And then we have the third group, frequently referred to in Japan as Hakkenshin, or the working poor. These are temporary dispatch or contract workers. They face low wages, incredibly long hours, unpaid overtime, and a total lack of social security. Basically, they are highly exploitable. During that 2008 economic crash we talked about, these workers were the absolute first to lose their jobs, and their company provided housing, which led directly to those infamous tent villages. Section 3. The invisible spaces. The cyber homeless. You might be wondering, if you don't see massive homeless encampments on the streets of Tokyo, where is everyone? Well, officially, the government claims the number of homeless individuals dropped to around 2,800 people by 2024. However, while tracking these numbers, authorities simultaneously installed hostile architecture all across these cities. We're talking about park benches with physical barriers right in the middle so you can't lie down, and floor obstacles in train stations. It was a systematic effort to push the unhoused completely out of public view. Driven out of sight and totally priced out by skyrocketing Tokyo rents, many part-time workers have become what's known as the cyber homeless. Instead of normal apartments, they rent tiny booths in 24-hour internet cafes. It costs just a fraction of standard rent and hefty deposit fees, and crucially, these spaces provide a roof over their heads and access to communal showers. Survival in these hidden spaces looks vastly different than traditional homelessness. Just imagine it. For a cheap daily rate, residents get a cubicle about a quarter the size of a hotel room, 100 yen lunches, unlimited drinks, and access to the internet and digital manga. Entire businesses have literally optimized their models to cater to this socially displaced population, creating this fascinating, neon-lit ecosystem of survival. Now, to maintain a perfectly impartial view here, we have to look at how the government is responding, because the state hasn't completely ignored this. They do offer a variety of welfare programs. There are education subsidies, medical discounts where seniors pay just 10% instead of 30%, child subsidies up to 40,000 yen a month, and a broader livelihood protection program called Seikatsu Hogo. They even recently introduced 30,000 yen cash handouts for low-income families to help combat inflation. But here's the wild part. Despite all of those programs existing on paper, only about 1.6% of the population, roughly 2.01 million individuals as of 2024, actually receive social aid. That is remarkably, shockingly low for a country where over 15% of people are living in relative poverty. So naturally, you gotta ask, if the safety net is right there and people are clearly struggling, why aren't they using it? Well, this brings us to a really fascinating narrative pivot. The answer lies in deep cultural barriers and powerful stigmas that keep the vulnerable from accessing the very safety nets designed to catch them. Culturally, poverty in Japan is heavily stigmatized as a personal failing. It is overwhelmingly viewed as a lack of personal effort, rather than a systemic or economic failure. Basically, if you fall behind, society often dictates that it's your own fault. And this profound cultural mindset also perfectly explains why Japan has shockingly low rates of charitable giving compared to other developed countries. And this societal stigma is deeply reinforced by the traditional government approach. We can neutrally observe that the traditional LDP ideology views citizens primarily through the lens of the family unit. So when someone applies for state aid, they're subjected to rigorous background checks. The state will actually contact the applicant's parents, siblings, and extended relatives to ensure that the family absolutely cannot pay first before the government will step in. This results in a truly heartbreaking reality. Researchers found that many eligible individuals, particularly highly educated single mothers, know exactly how to get aid, but they intentionally do not apply. They literally choose a hidden, agonizing daily struggle just to maintain their dignity and independence, rather than face the public shame of the state contacting their families. It brilliantly, yet tragically, illustrates exactly how social exclusion operates. So, as the traditional nuclear family in Japan continues to shrink and people become more and more isolated, we have to leave you with this provocative thought. What happens to those who have absolutely no one left to rely on? It's a critical, urgent question about the future sustainability of Japan's social fabric. Keep questioning what's beneath the surface, and I'll see you next time on The Explainer.